Hello everyone, welcome to today's episode of The Great Tech Guy. Similar to what I've done previously with Zorin OS, I'm going to downgrade Linux Mint's RAM until I can no longer get it running. In this video, the Linux Mint VM will contain about 4 GB of swap as well to place my machine within the lines of how the real machine might work. Although I have this in place, this may not reflect real usage and will vary based on multiple factors. I hope you enjoy this video. 4 GB of RAM. So first off, I'm running Linux Mint with 4 GB of RAM and 4 CPUs. 4 GB of RAM is recommended on Linux Mint's website. As we can see, the machine is currently using just over 2 GB of the total RAM. As we can see, not much, if any, of the swap storage is currently being used. I will now open 9 more Firefox tabs to see how much impact that will have on this machine. I will have to skip through this, as there was some questionable content on the home pages. Now, Linux Mint uses about 2.5 GB of RAM. Alongside this, I noticed that the machine still isn't using any swap. I will now be opening LibreOffice Writer. At this point, the system is now using in between 2 3/4 GB of RAM and 3 GB. I now notice that the machine is using some swap, albeit a very little amount. I have now opened the Bluetooth Manager, or Bluemin as it's called. As expected, the RAM did not change much from me opening Bluemin, but it has gone up slightly from the already running processes. I opened a couple more apps, and I am now at 3 GB of RAM usage. I am now going to restart my VM so I can lower the RAM. 2 GB of RAM. I am now running Linux Mint with 2 GB of RAM alongside the same 4 CPUs. 2 GB of RAM is the required RAM amount according to Linux Mint's website. With just the startup app and the system monitor, the system is using 1 GB of RAM. I will now open Firefox. With Firefox open, we see that with just one tab, the machine is now using 1.5 GB of RAM. It seems with all 3 apps open, some, albeit a very low amount, of the swap is being used. I am now going to open YouTube in Firefox. YouTube takes a little bit of time to open, with both the RAM and the swap usage going upwards. With 10 Firefox tabs open, we see a little bit more RAM usage and a good bit more swap usage. I am now opening LibreOffice. With LibreOffice Draw now open, we see about the same amount of RAM usage with another spike in swap usage. I predict that the RAM usage will not go up further while the swap usage will go up. Unlike I had just predicted, it seems that RAM usage has gone slightly up, while swap is still similar, albeit with a little less usage. I am now restarting the machine so I can lower the RAM even more. 1 GB of RAM. For the rest of this video, I'll be staying underneath the required RAM amount as per Linux Mint's website. This time I am at 1 GB of RAM with 4 CPUs. With just Linux Mint's Welcome app, one Firefox tab with Google, and the system monitor, we are using about 90% of RAM with about 3/4 GB of swap. I am now once again going to open YouTube. Loading YouTube, we see about the same amount of RAM, with more swap being used. To load YouTube on my host takes an entire 2 seconds in a test I did. On this machine, it takes about 7.5 seconds just to load the UI elements in the top right, with an entire 15 seconds before most elements are even loaded. As I load a YouTube video, we can see how slow this really is. I have a hard time pausing the video as it starts playing. YouTube also has a hard time loading the video. Firefox seems to struggle also a bit when opening other new tabs. We have now bumped swap usage to just under a gigabyte. RAM usage does stay about 875 to 900 megabytes though. Opening LibreOffice Impress with a template, we see the RAM usage actually went down, but the swap usage went up significantly. I think that I am now ready to restart the machine to lower the RAM even more. As I close the apps, I can see that the machine actually takes some time to close the apps. Half a gigabyte of RAM. I am now using only half a gigabyte of RAM with the same 4 CPUs. Seeing the boot of this machine and the mention of the numbers of the CPU are very important. More on that in a moment. After trying to boot Linux Mint for over 3 minutes, I finally gave up. This wasn't the same error that occurred with Zorin OS. Grub loaded, Linux Mint did not. I am now going to add 2 more CPUs to this machine. Half a gigabyte of RAM with 6 CPUs. I am now loading Linux Mint with half a gigabyte of RAM with 6 CPUs, as 4 CPUs didn't give Linux Mint enough resources to boot. We can see this time that Grub clearly loads, as this time we get the boot menu as the system didn't actually start last time. I became very impatient very fast. I only cut off about half of what I did last time, although there was still some that I didn't cut out. Me being impatient didn't help that my host's resources were still fine. I come to the conclusion that Linux Mint cannot be easily and fastly booted at half a gigabyte of RAM. 3/4 gigabytes of RAM. With the failure of half a gigabyte of RAM, I decided to give more RAM to the machine. I am now trying to run Linux Mint at 3/4 gigabytes of RAM and 4 CPUs, if I can type correctly! With the Welcome app, a Firefox tab, and the System Monitor, we see over half a gigabyte of RAM being used with about a gigabyte of swap being used. I will now once again load YouTube. Putting the machine now through a YouTube tab and 9 empty tabs, the system is now using 3/5 of the current available RAM. The swap also is now above 1 gigabyte. Running YouTube is now even slower than it was before. The page itself lags a lot and takes a bit to load the video. After accidentally closing out YouTube, I go back to YouTube and open up more apps on the machine. I notice in the Drawing app that the app now loads lines more slowly than before. We now see that RAM usage is not much different than before, but the swap has gone up a bit. With LibreOffice now open, the swap has once again went up. With this, I believe we are now at the end. I am now shutting down this virtual machine for the last time in this video. In this video, we found that we can easily run Linux Mint with 3/4 gigabytes of RAM without issue. Compared to Zorin OS 18, Linux Mint seems to require a bit more RAM to completely operate. Do remember that the results of this video will be different on different virtual machines and even on real machines. If you want to watch the video where I test Zorin OS 18, I will try to leave a pop-up on the screen. Thank you for watching this video.